The glass doors of Hale Global Tower slid open with their usual mechanical whisper. But for Richard Hale, the sound felt louder than a thunderclap rolling across Manhattan. The billionaire sat behind his desk on the 50th floor, the city stretching endlessly below him like a kingdom he had conquered and now ruled with tired precision. His office was a monument of glass and steel, designed to intimidate. The desk stretched wide, the view commanded awe, and the silence inside was broken only by the muted hum of air conditioning and the occasional click of his fountain pen. Richard had become a man of habits, every hour segmented into meetings, calls, and interviews. His mornings were always filled with hopeful candidates, each eager to secure a position in one of his many companies. Over the years, he had perfected the art of listening without hearing, watching without caring. He knew when to nod, when to let his eyes linger on a resume, when to feign curiosity about a candidate's rehearsed ambitions. His empire thrived on precision and order, but somewhere beneath the surface, a vacancy gnawed at him. Success had filled his accounts, penthouse, and reputation, but not his heart. Grace Miller, his assistant of 15 years, entered the room holding a tablet. Her steps were quiet but firm, her loyalty proven by years of navigating his moods and demands. She never wasted words. "Mr. Hale, your 11:30 appointment is here. Sarah Mensah." Richard did not look up immediately. He scanned the resume lying before him. Another graduate, another hopeful face, another voice rehearsing answers to questions she thought mattered. He sighed. "Send her in." The door opened. A young woman stepped inside. She wore a navy blazer that had lost its sharpness and shoes carefully polished but undeniably worn. Her movements carried nervousness, but her posture was straight. Her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Richard began his standard greeting, his eyes still fixed on the resume in his hand. But when he looked up, the rhythm of his day collapsed. It was her face. Not exactly, but close enough to jolt his soul. The girl could not have been older than 21, but her features carried the echo of a woman he had not seen in more than 2 decades. Dark brown eyes flecked with gold, framed by lashes that cast shadows on her cheekbones, the slight tilt of her head when uncertain. The curve of her lips was familiar enough to wrench him back in time. It was as though Amina Mensah, the woman who had vanished from his life with only a letter, had stepped into his office again. "Mr. Hale, are you all right?" The girl's voice carried warmth and a hint of an accent. The sound of it struck him harder than her appearance. He was no longer in his tower, but standing once more on the autumn campus of Hartwell University, hearing the voice of the Ghanaian exchange student who had changed the trajectory of his life. His fingers trembled, and the resume slipped from his hand to the floor. He managed, "Yes, I am fine," though his throat tightened around the words. "Please sit down." The young woman crossed the room and sat gracefully in the leather chair opposite his desk. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at him steadily. She seemed nervous, but her gaze did not falter. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Mensah," Richard said, forcing his voice into steadiness. "I graduated from NYU last month with a degree in business administration." Her voice was clear, but beneath its control lived urgency. "I have little experience yet, but am willing to work harder than anyone else. I need this job desperately. My mother is sick, and the medical bills are overwhelming." The word mother made his chest tighten. Her tone, the way she emphasized the first syllable, was precisely how Amina used to speak. He gripped the armrest of his chair until his knuckles whitened. "Where is your mother now?" "She lives in Ghana. She raised me alone after we moved here when I was 3. She worked long hours, sometimes at 3 jobs at once, to make sure I had a future. Now it is my turn to take care of her. She needs surgery, but the cost is impossible for us." Ghana. The word echoed through his mind like a hammer against stone. Amina was from Ghana. Amina, who had written that last letter. Amina, who had promised to come back. He stared at the young woman across from him, feeling the impossible threads of fate tighten around him. "You remind me of someone," he said softly, more to himself than to her. She attempted a small smile. "People say I have one of those faces, but I assure you, Mr. Hale, I am prepared to prove myself. I just need a chance." Richard rose from his chair and walked toward the massive windows. Below, the city churned with endless movement, cars streaming like veins, pedestrians moving like currents in a river. His reflection in the glass met his gaze, silver hair threaded through dark, deep lines etched by years of ambition and regret. His empire stretched across continents, yet here was something far greater than any acquisition. This girl might be a fragment of his lost life, a piece of the woman he could never forget. "You are hired," he said, his voice decisive. Sarah blinked in shock. "But we have not even discussed the position or salary." "Executive assistant, $75,000 to start, full health benefits, and an advance to cover your mother's medical bills." Her mouth parted in disbelief. "That is incredibly generous, but I cannot accept charity." "This is not charity." His voice was firm. "You will earn every penny. I run a demanding operation. If you are half as determined as you claim, you will have your hands full." She exhaled slowly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. You do not know what this means to me." Family, the word lingered in his mind, trembling with unspoken significance. "Can you start Monday?" he asked. "I can start now, if you wish." Her eagerness drew from him a faint smile, rare and unguarded. "Monday will be fine. Grace will see to the paperwork." Sarah rose and extended her hand. Richard took it. The contact shocked him, electricity racing along nerves long dulled by routine and wealth. Her grip was intense, her skin warm. For an instant, he forgot where he was. It felt like destiny had entered his office wearing a worn navy blazer. When she left, silence filled the room. Richard stood at the window again, watching the millions of lives weaving through the streets. His empire was intact, his schedule still whole, but none seemed to matter. He had sought to fill a void with power and wealth for years. Yet if Sarah was who he now feared and hoped she was, he had been a father for 21 years without knowing it. Grace re-entered, her gaze sharp. "That was unusual. You hired her without hesitation, without checking her resume. You offered her more than some of our executives make. What is happening, Richard?" He turned to her slowly, the weight of the past pressing heavily on his shoulders. "Grace, I need you to do something for me, discreetly. A complete background check on Sarah Mensah. Birth records, education, and family history, everything." Grace studied him for a long moment. "This is about her resemblance to someone, isn't it? Someone from your past." Richard reached into the bottom drawer of his desk and withdrew a small wooden box. He had not opened it in years. Inside was a folded letter, its paper yellowed, its ink faded but still clear. He handed it to her without speaking. She read silently, then looked up with wide eyes. "Amina Mensah. My God, Richard, you do not think. I do not know what to think." His voice cracked with pain he had hidden for 2 decades. "But I must find out." When she left, he sat alone again. He unfolded the letter with trembling hands and read the words he had memorized 22 years ago. "I love you. I will be back. My mother is dying." He closed his eyes. For 2 decades he had whispered her name into the silence, searching crowds for her face, hearing her accent in strangers, loving a ghost. And now her reflection had walked through his door. "Please let her be mine," he whispered to the empty office. "Please let this not be another ghost." Manhattan continued to roar outside, indifferent to one man's turmoil. But Richard Hale knew his life had shifted. The stranger at his door had torn open the past, and the future would demand answers he had never dared to seek. The city had not changed, but Richard Hale felt he had stepped into another life entirely. And the morning had begun like any other. Appointments stacked, board meetings waiting, investors restless. Still by evening, every thought circled back to the young woman who had walked into his office like an apparition. Sarah Mensah. The name clung to his mind, tasting old memories and unresolved questions. After Grace left his office with the promise of a discreet investigation, Richard remained frozen at his desk. His hand lingered on the yellowed letter, fingertips brushing across the fading ink, as though touch could summon Amina back. 22 years of emptiness condensed into a single face that carried hope and terror. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid burning down his throat, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window as Manhattan glowed with the lights of millions who knew nothing of his torment. When his phone rang, he snatched it up too quickly. It was Grace. "I pulled what I could from public records already," she said, her voice even, but edged with curiosity. "There's something unusual. Go on." "Sarah's birth certificate. Registered in New York, September 15th, 2003. Mother listed as Amina Mensa, father's name left blank." The glass nearly slipped from Richard's hand. September 2003, 9 months after the night Amina disappeared, leaving only that promise scribbled on paper. His pulse roared in his ears, his chest tight with revelation. He forced his voice into calm. "Thank you, Grace. Get me everything, quietly. No one else must know." When the call ended, Richard sank into his leather chair. For the first time in years, his carefully constructed world of contracts and acquisitions seemed irrelevant. Numbers could not explain this. Deals could not resolve it. If Sarah was truly his daughter, 21 years of her life had unfolded without him. First steps, first words, birthdays, nights of illness, mornings of laughter, all lost to silence. He closed his eyes, and the past came flooding back. Hartwell University, autumn of 2001. He had been young, ambitious, and already preparing for business school. His life was neatly mapped. Graduate, marry Cordelia, the daughter of a banking family, and build an empire. Then came Amina, stepping into his international business class in a dress the color of sunlight, her accent lilting like music. She had been unlike anyone he had ever known. Brilliant, fierce, yet gentle in ways that left him disarmed. The memory of her laugh still lived somewhere deep, a sound that had carried him through nights when loneliness pressed hardest. Richard rubbed his temples. Had she known she was pregnant when she left? He remembered her words. "My mother is dying. I must go back. I will return." But she never had. The sound of a knock pulled him back. Grace entered, carrying a folder. Her expression was unreadable. "I thought you'd want this tonight." He took the folder with hands that shook despite his effort to remain composed. Inside were scanned records, university enrollment documents, old addresses, immigration forms, and photographs. Richard's heart stuttered as he looked at them. One showed Amina at 20, smiling faintly for an ID card, her eyes holding that same warmth Sarah carried. Another showed a younger Sarah at 5 years old, clinging to Amina's side outside a modest apartment building in Queens. Richard traced the outline of Amina's face with his finger, fighting against the years of regret. Grace's voice cut into the silence. "If this is true, if she is yours, what will you do?" Richard stared at the photo until his eyes blurred. "What I should have done 22 years ago. Find Amina. Find the truth." Grace studied him with quiet concern. "Richard, you've spent decades building walls around yourself. If you tear them down now, there's no going back. Maybe that's the point." That night, Richard left the office early. The city streets buzzed with energy, but his penthouse was silent when he entered, echoing with the absence of a family he might have had. He poured another drink, though it did little to settle the storm in his chest. The velvet box he had carried for over 2 decades, lying on the marble counter, inside, glimmered the ring he had bought for Amina, the symbol of a future never lived. He opened it, the diamond catching the light, and whispered into the emptiness. "You promised you would return. Did something stop you, or did you choose to let me go?" Sleep evaded him. Memories of that snowy February night when they had first whispered "I love you" circled his mind. By dawn, he had made his decision. The following day, Sarah arrived early, her eagerness evident in the briskness of her steps and the nervous smile she offered as she greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Hale. I've already arranged the Morrison files for your meeting." Richard studied her closely, the tilt of her head, the way her hands moved gracefully over the keyboard, the faint melody she hummed absent-mindedly. It was like watching Amina all over again. He forced himself to respond with practiced calm. "Excellent work, Sarah." As she left his office, he turned to Grace. "Arrange a private investigator in Ghana, discreet. I need to know what happened to Amina Mensa." Grace hesitated. "Richard, are you sure you want to open this door? I've lived too long with it closed." 3 days later, the first report arrived. The investigator had confirmed that Amina still lived in Ghana. She had never married. She worked as a volunteer in rural health clinics despite her disability. The word disability clawed at Richard's chest. The report continued. She had been in a serious accident 21 years ago. She had never walked again. Richard sat in silence after reading, the world spinning around him. Amina, once so full of grace and vitality, had endured all that alone. Raising a child, surviving poverty, bound to a wheelchair, and he had not been there. Guilt gnawed at him, darker than any failure in business. Grace watched him quietly. Do you still love her? He looked at the skyline, the city glowing beneath the fading sun. Love doesn't vanish because time passes. If anything, it has only grown heavier. Grace touched his arm gently. Then go to her. The idea rooted itself immediately. He could not sit in his penthouse while Amina struggled half a world away. He would go to Ghana, find her, and face the truth, even if it shattered what little peace he had built. That night, Richard called Sarah into his office. She entered with her usual composure, though she glanced at him curiously. Is everything all right, Mr. Hale? He studied her, the lines of her face, the fierce determination in her eyes. She was both stranger and family, both mystery and revelation. He wanted to tell her everything, that he might be her father, that her mother was the love of his life, but the words refused to form. Not yet. Yes, everything is fine. I just wanted to say, you're doing excellent work. Her smile lit her face with gratitude. Thank you. I won't let you down. Once more, she left the velvet box in his hand when she left. Tomorrow, he would begin the journey back to the past. He would face the woman who had never truly left his heart tomorrow. But tonight, as the city glimmered below, Richard Hale allowed himself a fragile, impossible hope. That love might survive decades. That forgiveness might still be possible. Tamaxa still remembered him, somewhere in Ghana. And that Sarah, the daughter he had never known, might one day call him father. The Gulfstream G650 hummed softly as it sliced through the sky, its polished wings gleaming against the vast stretch of Atlantic blue. Inside the cabin, Richard Hale sat in silence, the steady rhythm of the engines unable to quiet the storm that raged inside him. His about business, meetings, negotiations, and acquisitions for decades. For decades, this was different. This flight carried him toward the truth he had been running from for 22 years. The seat across from him held the artifacts of a life he had once dreamed of. The yellowed letter from Amina, folded so many times its creases threatened to tear. The manila folder contains documents Grace had gathered, such as birth certificates and photos that told half the story. And the small velvet box, its hinge stiff with age, contained the ring he had never been able to give. He had built an empire, but this ring was the one thing that still held meaning. Grace had been the last person he saw before boarding. She had stood in his office, watching him pack with a mixture of loyalty and unease. "You're sure about this, Richard?" she had asked quietly. "As sure as I have ever been about anything." She had nodded, but her eyes had carried the weight of her unspoken fears. What if Amina did not want to see him? What if the years had changed her so much that love was impossible? What if Sarah discovered the truth before he was ready to tell her? Everything hung in the balance. But Richard knew he could not remain in the safety of ignorance. The time for waiting had passed. The flight attendant entered the cabin and asked if he wanted something to drink. Richard shook his head. He was already bracing himself with the only thing that mattered, resolve. He leaned back, staring out the oval window as the miles disappeared beneath him. Somewhere ahead lay Accra, Ghana's capital, a city he had once only known from Amina's stories. So he would stand on the same soil she had returned to, keeping her from him for 2 decades. He tried to imagine what she would look like now. The photographs from the investigator had been blurry, grainy captures of a woman in a wheelchair wearing bright patterned dresses, her hair streaked with gray. Yet even through the poor resolution, he had seen her dignity, the same grace she had carried as a student when she first captivated him with her fierce intelligence. She was still Amina. That was all that mattered. The descent into Kotoka International Airport was smooth, but Richard's heart was anything but. He adjusted his suit jacket, as though armor might shield him from what lay ahead. Outside, Accra spread across the land like a tapestry of contradictions. Modern glass buildings rising beside crowded markets. Paved highways giving way to dusty side streets. Wealth and poverty coexisting side by side. This was the world Amina had chosen when she left. Or perhaps it was the world she had been forced to return to. His driver was waiting, a tall Ghanaian named Kwame, who spoke English with a lilting cadence that reminded Richard painfully of Amina. The Land Rover they traveled in jolted along uneven roads as the city gave way to the countryside. Richard watched through the window as rolling hills unfolded, dotted with villages of colorful houses, children carrying water in plastic buckets, and women balancing baskets on their heads with effortless grace. The air was thick with humidity, heavy with the scent of earth, wood smoke, and tropical flowers. "We are close now," Kwame said after 2 hours of driving. Adwamoa village is just ahead. Richard's pulse hammered in his chest. His throat felt dry. He had faced down billion-dollar negotiations, ruthless competitors, even political scandals, but nothing had ever made him feel as unsteady as this moment. He had lived in a fortress of steel and glass for 22 years. Now he was about to step into the past, into the arms of the only woman he had ever truly loved, and he had no idea if she would welcome him or cast him out. The Land Rover slowed as it entered the village. Children stopped playing to watch the foreign vehicle pass, their laughter replaced by wide-eyed curiosity. Women turned from their market stalls to see the stranger in the back seat, a man in a tailored suit out of place amid the humble rhythm of rural life. The driver stopped before a small blue house set apart from the others. The roof was corrugated metal, the walls plain concrete, but the garden in front was neat and orderly, cassava and plantains growing in tidy rows. "That is her home," Kwame said. Richard opened the door with unsteady hands. His polished shoes sank slightly into the red earth as he stepped out. Children gathered at a distance, whispering, their curious eyes following him. He carried a bouquet of bright orange bird-of-paradise flowers that he had purchased in Accra. In his pocket, the velvet box felt as heavy as stone. The house's porch was simple, with 2 plastic chairs and a table scattered with medical supplies. Richard climbed the steps, his legs trembling. He could hear faint sounds inside, the creak of wheels on a floor, the rustle of someone moving. He lifted his hand and knocked gently on the doorframe. "Come in," called a voice from within. The sound pierced him. Even aged, even softened by time, it was her voice. Amina. Richard stepped inside. The room was small but tidy, the walls lined with photographs. In the center, seated at a low table, was a woman in a wheelchair. She wore a dress of vivid kente cloth, her hair shorter now, streaked with silver. Her hands moved gracefully as she organized medicine bottles and notebooks. When she turned, time stopped. Her face was older, lined with hardship, yet still impossibly beautiful. The same warm brown eyes widened in shock, disbelief chasing across her features. They stared at one another for a long moment, unable to breathe. Amina. Richard's voice cracked on her name. Her hands stilled on the table. She whispered, barely audible, "Richard, it can't be." But it was. After 22 years he stood in her doorway, holding flowers like a nervous boy. "I'm here," he said. "I finally found you." Tears welled in her eyes, and her shoulders shook as she pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Richard, you should not have come." "I had to." Silence filled the room, heavy with 2 decades of lost time. Richard's gaze wandered to the photographs on the wall. He froze when he saw them. A girl with Amina's eyes and his jawline, captured in every stage of life, smiling at school, holding books, wearing a graduation cap. Sarah, their daughter, his knees weakened, and he gripped the back of a chair for balance. All the lost years stared back at him from those frames. Birthdays he had not attended, milestones he had not witnessed. "You never told me," he whispered, his voice hoarse with grief. Amina lowered her eyes, shame and sorrow etched in her expression. "I thought it was best. I thought you deserved your life. My life was nothing without you, without her." She flinched at the raw pain in his words. "Richard, you don't understand. After the accident, His voice sharpened. The bus crash. I was pregnant. The doctors said neither of us would survive. But Sarah lived. I lost my legs, Richard. I could not bring myself to ask you to love half a woman. He stepped forward and knelt beside her wheelchair, his eyes burning. Half a woman. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You raised our daughter alone, built a life out of nothing, and helped others even while suffering yourself. Do you think I could love you less for that? Amina's tears spilled over, her hands trembling as she tried to push him away.
You don't know what 20 years have done to me. You don't know what it costs. Then let me learn, he whispered fiercely. Let me carry it with you. Her eyes searched his. Desperate and afraid, she said, I don't love you anymore. But the lie wavered in her voice. He saw the truth in her tears and how her hand lingered when he caught it in his own. You do, he said softly. You always have. She broke then, sobs shaking her frame as 22 years of silence collapsed between them. Richard pulled her gently into his arms, careful of her fragility, holding her as he had dreamed of for half a lifetime. Outside, the village bustled with ordinary life, unaware of the extraordinary reunion happening in the small blue house. Inside, Richard Hale and Amina Mensah clung to each other, two souls bound by love, loss, and the fragile hope of a second chance. And on the wall, in every photograph, their daughter's face watched silently, proof of the love that had survived across decades and continents. The morning light crept through the cracks of the shutters, spilling across the room where Richard Hale had spent a restless night on a narrow cot. Outside, the village stirred awake. Roosters crowed, women's voices carried as they fetched water, and children's laughter echoed across the dusty square. The air smelled of wood smoke and bread baking, scents that reminded him of the life Amina had built without him. He rose slowly, the ache of sleeplessness heavy in his bones. His eyes found her immediately. Amina sat in her wheelchair near the window, her face turned toward the horizon, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had not spoken much after their reunion, retreating into silence as though words had become too dangerous. Richard stepped closer. She didn't turn. You're awake, she said softly. I never really slept, he admitted. Neither did I. He moved beside her, careful not to invade the fragile space she kept around herself. The light caught the silver strands in her hair, and he was struck again by the quiet beauty she carried, tempered now with the weight of endurance. Amina, we cannot keep pretending last night didn't happen. She finally turned, her eyes shadowed. What do you want me to say, Richard? That I am glad you found me, that after all these years I still dream of you, that I spent every night wondering if you ever thought of me. Yes, he whispered, because all that is true for me. Her lips trembled, but she shook her head. It changes nothing. I am not the woman you loved. I am broken. Number. He crouched beside her chair, forcing her to meet his gaze. You are the woman I loved then, and the woman I love now. The accident, the years, they don't erase that. They never will. Amina's voice cracked. You don't understand what it means to live like this, to fight for every scrap, to raise a child alone, to feel like less than everyone around you. Richard reached for her hand. I should have been there. Her expression hardened. But you weren't. The words struck like knives because they were true. He had not been there for Sarah's birth, her childhood, the long nights when Amina worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. He had not been there when Amina fought through pain and despair, teaching her daughter resilience in the shadow of loss. All of that she had carried alone. I failed you, he said quietly, but I don't want to forget you anymore. Amina pulled her hand back, pressing it against her lips as though holding in a cry. She looked at him with eyes full of memory and sorrow. Do you know what kept me alive after the accident? When the doctors told me I would never walk again, when I was certain Sarah wouldn't survive. Richard shook his head. It was you, your voice in my memory, your promises. You looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I held on to that when I thought I had nothing left. Her tears fell freely now, and Richard felt his own vision blur. Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me come? Because you deserved a life without chains. You were destined for greatness. I couldn't ask you to tie yourself to someone broken, living in a village with nothing to offer. Richard's jaw tightened. Greatness means nothing without the people you love. Do you know what my empire gave me? Loneliness, a hollow heart, 22 years of success that felt like failure every single night. Amina turned away, staring out at the sun climbing over the fields. You make it sound so simple, but life is not simple. No, he agreed, but love is. They sat in silence until footsteps approached. The door opened without a knock, and Sarah entered. She was still dressed in her navy blazer from work, her face drawn from travel and sleepless nights.
She froze when she saw Richard and Amina together, their closeness undeniable, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling. Amina straightened in her chair, wiping quickly at her tears. "Sarah, you should be in New York." "I couldn't stay," Sarah said firmly, "not after everything I've learned." She turned to Richard, her eyes sharp. "I know, Mr. Hale, or should I say, Father." The word cracked the air like thunder. Amina gasped. Richard's breath caught. Sarah's eyes filled with both fury and longing. "You knew, didn't you? Both of you. That's why everything has been so strange. That's why you looked at me like I was more than just an employee." Richard rose slowly, his hands trembling. "Sarah, I only found out days ago. I wasn't certain until you stared at me like a ghost and saw her face, my. Amina reached out desperately. "Sarah, please, I never told him. I thought it was best for you." In the best form, Sarah's voice broke. "Do you know what it's like to grow up wondering why your father isn't them? To hear stories about how wonderful he was, but never see him, or never feel what it's like to be wanted by both parents." Richard stepped closer. "Sarah, I wanted you every day of your life. I just didn't know you existed." Sarah's tears spilled over, and now you do. What happens now? The room was silent except for her ragged breathing. Amina looked shattered. Richard, hollowed out. Richard swallowed hard. "Now we stop hiding. Now we become what we should have been all along, a family." Stared at him, her heart caught between anger and aching hope. Her voice was soft, almost childlike. "Do you really mean that?" "With every part of me," Richard said. Amina's shoulders shook as she whispered, "Richard." He turned to her, his eyes blazing with determination. "We've lost 22 years, Amina. We cannot lose another day." Sarah looked between them, her parents who had loved and lost each other across continents and decades. She saw the pain etched in her mother's face, the desperation in her father's, and something inside her shifted. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe broken things could be mended. "Then prove it," she whispered. "Prove that we're a family." Richard dropped to his knees before Amina's wheelchair, reaching into his pocket. The velvet box appeared, its blue fabric faded but still intact. He opened it, revealing the diamond ring he had carried across oceans and years. Amina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard's voice shook, but his eyes never wavered. "I bought this for you when we were 21. I've carried it with me every day since. I should have given it to you then, but I'm giving it to you now. Not to erase the past, but to build the future we were meant to have." Sarah's tears streamed silently as she watched, her heart twisting with emotions she could hardly name. Amina stared at the ring, torn between hope and fear. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Richard leaned closer, his voice low, urgent. "Marry me, Amina. Not because you have to, not because of pity, but because you are still the love of my life. Because nothing, not time, distance, or tragedy, has changed that." The silence stretched. Outside, the village bustled with ordinary life, but inside the blue house, the air held its breath. Finally, Amina closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, her gaze was soft, vulnerable, and filled with the truth she could no longer deny. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, Richard." The word broke the silence like dawn breaking the night. Richard slipped the ring onto her trembling finger, and the hollow in his heart began to close for the first time in 2 decades. Sarah stepped forward, covering her mouth with one hand, her tears now of joy. She whispered the word she had waited her whole life to say, "Dad." And for Richard Hale, nothing in his empire, wealth, or power had ever meant as much as that single word. The celebrations in the village after Richard's proposal had been quiet, intimate.
Amina's neighbors gathered outside her small blue house, offering blessings through smiles, warm embraces, and prayers whispered in Twi. Richard had never been part of anything so genuine, so stripped of pretense. Yet, beneath the joy, shadows stirred, memories left unresolved, fears unspoken, secrets still buried. The next morning dawned heavy with humidity. The sun painted the clay roofs of Adwamoa in gold, while smoke from cooking fires curled lazily into the air. Richard awoke to the sound of drums in the distance, a rhythmic beat that seemed to echo the pounding of his heart. He felt hope for the first fragile, uncertain, but alive. Sarah sat on the porch when he emerged from the small guest house he had been staying in. She was sipping tea from a clay cup, her face calm but her eyes restless. She looked at him, then a daughter could board it and yearning. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, not quite meeting his gaze. Richard sat beside her, the wooden chair creaking under his weight. He studied her profile, the strong jaw she had inherited from him, the delicate curve of her nose from Amina. Every glance reminded him of the years he had missed. "I don't know how to do this," Sarah admitted suddenly, her voice tight. "I don't know how just to accept that you're my father." He said gently that you don't have to accept it all simultaneously. "I just want a chance." Sarah turned to him, her eyes brimming. "Do you know how many times I asked Mama about you? When other kids brought their fathers to school, they had someone cheering at soccer games and teaching them to drive. She always said you were special and would have loved me if you knew. But that didn't stop the emptiness." Richard felt her words like blows to the chest. "I can't give you those years back, Sarah. I can only promise I'll never stop being your father from this moment forward." Her lips quivered, but she looked away, blinking back tears. "We'll see." Inside the house, Amina busied herself with sorting medical supplies. It was her shield, the work she had always clung to when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Richard entered quietly, watching her hands move with practiced precision. "You're avoiding me," he said. "I'm working," she replied without looking up. "You're avoiding me," he repeated. Finally, she stopped, her hands trembling as she placed a bottle back on the table. "Richard, last night was overwhelming. Everything is happening too fast." "We don't have time to waste," he said firmly. 22 years is long enough." Amina turned to him, her eyes blazing. "You think a ring fixes everything, and a few words erase decades of pain." "I lost my legs, Richard. I lost my future. Do you know what it's like to depend on others for the simplest things? To see pity in people's eyes every day?" Richard stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Do you know what it's like to live in penthouses, boardrooms, private jets, and feel thing? Do you know what it's like to build an empire and lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wishing you were in a cramped dorm room again, with the only woman you ever loved?" Her anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of sorrow. "I kept your letter," he continued, his voice breaking. "Every day. I read it until the paper nearly fell apart. You promised you'd come back, and when you didn't, I thought I had lost you forever." Amina's eyes softened, tears shimmering. "I wanted to come back, but after the accident, I couldn't. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see me like this." Richard dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair. "Look at me. Do I look ashamed to be here with you?" She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. She let herself lean into him for the first time in years, her walls crumbling, just enough for hope to seep in. But hope was fragile. Later that afternoon, a messenger arrived from Accra with a sealed envelope. Grace had sent it. Richard's stomach tightened as he tore it open. Inside was the full report, the investigation into Amina's life, the hospital records, the financial struggles, even a list of people who had helped her over the years. But at the bottom, there was something unexpected. "Nicole Mensah is still legally married." Richard froze. Married. He reread the line, his pulse pounding. The name was unfamiliar, Daniel Kumi, a marriage certificate from 15 years ago, no record of divorce. He stormed outside, the paper trembling in his hand. Amina was in the garden, watering the plants Sarah had helped her plant as a child. "What is this?" he demanded, thrusting the paper toward her. She looked at it and paled. "Richard, You married someone else." Her hands shook as she set the watering can down. "It wasn't what you thought." "Then explain," he snapped. "Because right now, it looks like I've spent 22 years mourning you, and you were building a life with someone else." Her eyes filled with shame. "It was never a marriage of love. Daniel helped me after the accident. He paid for medicine, for Sarah's schooling when I couldn't. I thought I owed him something." "So you married him out of obligation," she nodded weakly. "He left after a few years. He couldn't handle the burden of my disability, of raising a child that wasn't his. I never heard from him again." Richard's rage softened into something more painful, pity, sorrow, betrayal tangled together. "And you never divorced." "I didn't have the means," she whispered. "In Ghana, these things are not always simple." Richard paced, running his hand through his hair. "So what does that make me, Amina? A fool chasing after a woman who belongs to someone else?" She wheeled closer, her voice desperate. "No, Richard. My heart has always belonged to you. Even when I signed that paper, I was still yours." He stopped, staring at her. His chest heaved with the weight of truth. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But the shadows of the past had a way of poisoning the present. Behind them, Sarah had been listening from the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Mama, you married another man." Amina turned, horrified. "Sarah, how could you?" Sarah's voice shook with fury and hurt. "How could you lie to me all these years? Tell me my father was some dream while you married someone else." Tears streamed down Amina's face. "I did it for you. For your future." Sarah shook her head, backing away. You did it because you didn't think you were enough. And maybe you weren't." The words cut deeper than any knife. Amina gasped, her body trembling. Richard moved toward Sarah, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I need time." She fled into the night, her figure vanishing into the shadows of the village. Richard stood torn between them, the woman he had loved his whole life, and the daughter he had only just begun to know, both slipping through his fingers. Amina's sobs broke the silence, raw and uncontainable. Richard knelt beside her, but his own voice shook. "We're drowning in the past, Amina. If we don't face it now, it will destroy us." The night around them was thick and heavy, the air alive with the sound of drums from a distant celebration. But in the small blue house on the edge of the village, the echoes were no joyfully, they were of secrets finally unearthed, wounds reopened, and a family teetering on the edge of breaking before it could begin. The village slept under a canopy of stars, but the Hale household was restless. The confrontation earlier had left every soul in that home shaken. Richard sat outside on the porch, his elbows on his knees, the paper with Daniel Kumi's name crumpled in his fist. The night was alive with the hum of crickets and the distant sound of drums, but it was deafening silence to him. Inside, Amina wept quietly, rocking herself in her wheelchair, whispering prayers under her breath in Twi. She had faced years of hardship, endured the loss of her body's freedom, and carried the weight of raising Sarah alone. Yet nothing compared to the look in her daughter's eyes when she discovered the truth. That look had shattered her. Sarah, meanwhile, wandered through the darkened streets of the village. She moved quickly past mud brick houses and shadowed alleys, her heart pounding. She needed space, air, and distance from the lies that poisoned her world. Her whole life had been shaped by half-truths, by a story her mother told and retold until it became scripture, and now she wondered if anything had ever been real. By dawn, the storm had not settled. Richard entered the house, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot. Amina sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. "We need to talk," he said. She lifted her eyes to him, haunted but defiant. "What about how I ruined everything?" "About the truth," he replied firmly. "No more hiding, Amina, not from me, not from Sarah, not from yourself." Her lips trembled. "I was 20 when the accident happened. I had nothing, no money, no family to lean on after Mama passed. Then Daniel appeared. He was kind at first, generous. He helped me when no one else would. I thought I owed him my life." Richard clenched his jaw. "So you gave him your hand in marriage." "I gave him a piece of paper," Amina corrected bitterly. "Never my heart. That was always yours. But when he left, when he abandoned me and Sarah, I felt cursed, like every choice I made destroyed the people around me. So I buried the truth.
I buried you. Richard's anger softened, replaced by sorrow. You buried us both. Amina looked away, her tears falling silently into her untouched tea. The door burst open then and Sarah returned. Her face was pale, her hair tangled, her eyes swollen from a night of tears. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Have you finished rewriting history?" she demanded. "Or are you still editing the parts you think I can't handle?" Amina gasped. "Sarah, please." "No," Sarah snapped. "You lied to me my entire life. You made me believe my father was some ghost, some unreachable figure who abandoned us. And all this time you were married to someone else." Richard stepped forward. "Sarah, it's not that simple." "Don't," she said sharply, her eyes flashing at him. "Don't defend her. You don't get to walk into my life for a week and tell me how to feel about 22 years of lies." Richard's chest tightened, but he didn't retreat. "Then tell me how you feel." Sarah's lips quivered. "I feel like I don't know who I am anymore, like my whole identity was built on a foundation of sand." She turned her tearful gaze on Amina. "You said he would have loved me if he knew, but you never gave him the chance. Why?" Amina's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing him. Fearful of losing you. Scared of being seen as less than whole." Sarah shook her head, her tears spilling freely. "You didn't trust him. You didn't trust me. You didn't even trust yourself." Amina reached out, but Sarah stepped back. "Don't. Not now." The silence that followed was unbearable. Richard broke it, his voice raw. "Then let me tell you both something. I've spent 2 decades with nothing but ghosts, and I'm not about to let either of you slip away now." Sarah turned to him, her anger trembling into grief. "You talk like love fixes everything. But love doesn't erase lies. Love doesn't change that you weren't there when I needed you." Richard's voice cracked. "If I had known, Sarah, nothing, no company, no empire, no success, would have kept me from you." Her lip trembled, but she held her ground. "Words are easy. Prove it." He stepped closer, his hand shaking as he extended it toward her. "Then let me be your father, starting now." Sarah stared at his hand for a long moment, torn between longing and mistrust. At last, she turned away, whispering, "I don't know if I can." And she left again, the door slamming echoing through the house like thunder. Amina buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Richard remained frozen, his hands still extended toward the empty air where his daughter had stood. Later that day, the village market filled with noise and color. Women bargained over vegetables, children darted between stalls, and men carried goods in woven baskets. Life went on, indifferent to the Hale family's storm. Sarah walked among the stalls, lost in thought. Every face she saw seemed to stare too long, whisper too much. She hated the feeling of being watched, of being judged. She wanted to scream that none of this was her fault. She had never asked for secrets, betrayal, or fathers arriving out of nowhere. But then she heard a soft and familiar voice speaking her name. Sarah. She turned. It was Kwame, the young man who had helped her mother with community projects for years. His eyes were kind, his smile tentative. "You look troubled," he said. She almost laughed at the understatement. "You could say that." He hesitated, then added, "Your mother loves you very much. Whatever else is broken, that part is genuine." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I don't know what's true anymore." Kwame tilted his head. "Then maybe it's time to find out for yourself. Not from whispers, not from half-told stories, but from them." Sarah looked away, her heart heavy with confusion. Maybe. Meanwhile, Richard returned to the guest house, where Grace was waiting with updates. She had flown in the night before, unable to let him face everything alone. "The investigation goes deeper," she said, spreading documents across the table. "Daniel Kumi is alive. He's in Accra." Richard stiffened. "Alive?" "Yes. And if he decides to claim Amina again, things could get complicated, legally and emotionally." Richard clenched his fists. "He abandoned her. He abandoned Sarah. He has no right." Grace's expression was grave. "The law doesn't care about right, it cares about papers."
Richard stared out the window toward Amina's house, where the woman he loved and the daughter he longed for were slipping further out of reach. He felt the walls closing in. "Then we'll fight," he said darkly, "whatever it takes." That evening, he returned to Amina. She sat on the porch, her eyes red, her body weary. He knelt before her again, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. "Amina, we can't let the past destroy us. Not your fear, not my anger, not Daniel. If we don't face this together, we'll lose Sarah. We'll lose everything." Her lips trembled. "And if Sarah never forgives me," Richard's voice was firm, "then we will spend every day proving to her that love is stronger than betrayal, that family is stronger than lies." Amina searched his face, finding not pity but determination. Slowly, she nodded. In the distance, Sarah stood half hidden in the shadows, listening. Her heart ached at the sound of their voices, desperation and fragile hope. She wanted to believe them. She tried to step forward, but trust, once fractured, was not easily mended. She turned away, her tears falling silently into the night. The sun dipped low over Accra, painting the horizon with streaks of red and violet, while Richard Hale paced the veranda of the guest house like a lion in a cage. Grace sat at a wooden table, her laptop open, her eyes sharp and calculating as she scrolled through documents and legal codes. The tension in the air was thick, heavier than the humidity that clung to their skin. "He is alive," Richard said, his voice edged with disbelief. "After everything, after abandoning her, abandoning Sarah, he dares to exist." Grace closed the laptop with a quiet snap. "Existing isn't the problem, Richard. It's what he might decide to do now that you've stepped back into Amina's life." Richard stopped pacing and leaned against the railing, his jaw tight. "If he comes near them, you'll see what," Grace cut him off. "Destroy him in a boardroom duel. Business isn't the same as this, Richard. This is family. This is the law." He exhaled sharply, gripping the railing so tightly the wood creaked. "I've built an empire for 22 years, conquered rivals, and silenced critics. But none of that taught me how to fight for the only two people who matter." Grace softened, her voice gentler now. "Then maybe it's time you learn." Meanwhile, in the small village of Adwamoa, Amina sat in her wheelchair by the window, watching Sarah pace the yard like a restless shadow. The girl's face was troubled, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though holding her world together by sheer force. "Sarah, please come inside," Amina called softly. Her daughter stopped, turned, and fixed her with eyes that burned with love and betrayal. "I don't know if I can look at you the same way anymore, Mama." Amina's breath caught. "I know I hurt you. I know I failed. But everything I did was to protect you." "Protect me?" Sarah's laugh was hollow. "You protected me from knowing my father. You protected me from the truth. And now, I don't even know who I am." Amina's hands trembled on the armrests of her chair. "You are my daughter. Strong, brave, compassionate." Sarah shook her head. I'm more than just your daughter. I'm high too." She gestured vaguely toward the road that led to Accra. "And because of you, I never knew him until now." Tears welled in Amina's eyes. "Sarah, you don't understand what it was like. After the accident. After Daniel." "Don't," Sarah snapped, her voice sharp with pain. "Don't say his name." Before Amina could respond, an approaching vehicle broke the fragile moment. Both mother and daughter turned toward the road. Dust rose in the golden light as a sleek black SUV rolled into the village square. Children scattered, curious villagers paused in their routines, and whispers rippled through the crowd. The car stopped in front of Amina's house. The driver stepped out first, but the man who emerged from the back seat froze Amina's heart. Daniel Kumi. He was older now, his once dark hair streaked with gray, his frame heavier, but his eyes, the same calculating eyes, were unmistakable. He adjusted the cuff of his expensive jacket as though he were arriving at a corporate gala, not a humble village. Amina gripped her wheelchair so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Mama, who is that?" Sarah whispered, though some of her already knew. Amina's voice broke. "He is the man I married." Daniel's smile was smooth, practiced. "Amina, it has been a long time." Richard arrived moments later, his car pulling up behind the SUV. The tension in the square spiked like a storm about to break. He stepped out, his gaze locking instantly on Daniel. "You," Richard growled. Daniel's smile widened. "And you must be the American, the one playing hero." Richard took a step forward, his body coiled with fury. "I'm the man who loves her. The man who never stopped loving her." The crowd murmured, the villagers sensing drama far greater than any market gossip. Daniel raised an eyebrow, his tone mocking. "Love. A convenient word. Tell me, American, where was your love when she needed it most? When she was lying in a hospital bed with nothing? Who paid for her medication? Who kept her alive long enough to raise that girl standing there?" Sarah's breath hitched. Her eyes darted between the two men, her world spinning faster. Richard's fists clenched. "You left them. You abandoned them." Daniel's smile faltered, replaced by a shadow of bitterness. "I left because I was tired of being shackled to another man's child." The words landed like knives. Sarah gasped, her face paling. She stumbled back a step, her chest heaving as if the air itself had turned toxic. Amina's voice cracked with fury. "Don't you dare speak of her that way. She is mine. She is his. She is ours." But Daniel only smirked. "Our she carries my name, not his." Richard surged forward, but Grace appeared at his side, gripping his arm. "Not here. She his to know not like this." The villagers whispered louder now, a circle forming around the confrontation. Every eye was on them, every breath caught in suspense. Daniel turned his gaze on Sarah, his tone deceptively gentle. "And you, girl, have you asked your mother why she never divorced me? Why has she never freed herself from me?" Sarah's hands shook. Her voice was barely audible. "Is it true?" Mama Amina's tears fell freely now. "Yes, it's true." The square erupted in gasps and murmurs. Richard's voice was thunder. "Enough! This ends now!" Daniel's smirk returned. "On the contrary, my American friend, this is just beginning." He leaned closer to Amina, his voice low but sharp. "I came because I heard whispers that you've found yourself a savior. But don't forget, on paper, you're still mine. And in this country, that matters." Amina's body shook, fear crawling up her spine like ice. Richard stepped between them, his voice cold as steel. "Then we'll change the paper." Daniel's eyes gleamed with challenge. "Try." The tension snapped like a bowstring. Richard's fist connected with Daniel's jaw before Grace or anyone else could stop him. The sound of the blow echoed through the square. Daniel stumbled back, blood on his lip, but his smile never wavered. "That was a mistake, American, a colossal mistake." Sarah rushed to her mother, her heart pounding in her ears. "Mama, what is happening? What have you dragged us into?" Amina clutched her daughter's hands, her voice desperate. "I only wanted to protect you." Richard stood tall, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on Daniel. "This isn't over." Daniel wiped the blood from his mouth, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Number. It's only just begun." As the SUV pulled away, the square buzzed with fearful whispers. A storm had arrived, and the Hale family stood at its center. Richard turned to Amina and Sarah, his voice grim. "He's not going to stop, not until he tears us apart." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears, her voice trembling. "Then maybe he already has." The weight of her words pressed down on them all. The village, once a refuge, now felt like a battlefield. And the past, buried, broken, unfinished, had returned in the form of a stranger who was no stranger. In that moment, Richard knew the fight was no longer just for love or forgiveness. It was for survival, for family, for the future. And Daniel Kumi had just declared war. Night draped its heavy cloak over Adwamoa, but sleep eluded every member of the Hale household. The confrontation in the village square hung like smoke from a fire that refused to burn out. Richard sat at the edge of his bed, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. He replayed Daniel's words again and again, each one cutting deeper. In the next room, Amina lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Memories long buried clawed their way back into her mind. Memories of Daniel's charm at first, the comfort he had offered when her world had collapsed after the accident, and the way that charm had curdled into control. She had chosen silence then, believing it was the safest path.
But silence had a way of growing teeth. Now it had returned to bite her. Curled on a mat near the window, Sarah had cried herself into exhaustion. Yet her rest was fitful, plagued by dreams of betrayal. She saw her mother's face, both young and vibrant, and older, etched with regret. She saw her father's face, angry, protective, desperate. And in the middle of it all was Daniel, a shadow twisting everything she thought she knew into something unrecognizable. The morning came with drums in the distance, calling villagers to the market. But this day felt different. Conversation stopped when Richard walked by. Eyes followed Sarah with pity or curiosity. Even Amina, who had once been respected as the village's quiet strength, now felt the weight of whispers pressing against her back. Inside the house, Richard confronted the truth aloud. "He's going to use the law against us," he said, his voice rough. Grace, who had stayed the night to keep watch, nodded grimly. "He has every legal advantage. The courts might still see him as the rightful husband, unless you prove he abandoned her." Richard's fists slammed onto the table. He gave her nothing. He left her with a newborn and no future. That should count for something. Grace's eyes softened. It should. But justice is rarely about what should be, it's about what you can prove. Amina wheeled herself closer, her eyes shadowed with years of pain. "He never divorced me. He never set me free. I wanted to forget him, but the law never let me." Richard crouched beside her, his voice fierce. "Then we fight, for you, for Sarah, for all of us." Sarah stood silently in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself. She wanted to believe Richard's conviction. She wanted to trust in his strength. But another part of her whispered doubts, doubts planted by years of silence and now watered by Daniel's poisonous words. That afternoon, a messenger arrived with a sealed envelope. Richard tore it open, his eyes scanning the neatly typed letter. His face hardened. "It's from Daniel," he said, tossing the paper onto the table. Grace picked it up and read aloud. "To whom it may concern, I hereby notify you of my intention to reclaim my lawful rights as the husband of Amina Kumi and the father of Sarah Kumi. Any attempt to interfere with this arrangement will result in immediate legal action under Ghanaian law." Amina's breath caught. "He dares." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He called me his daughter." Richard turned to her quickly. "You are not his. You are mine." But Sarah's eyes were filled with uncertainty. "Am I right? Mama said she never divorced him. What if—" "Don't," Richard said sharply, then softened. "Sarah, you are my daughter. You always were. You always will be." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken fears. Later, Richard met with the village elder Nana Kwaku, a man whose wisdom was respected across the region. They sat beneath a baobab tree, the air thick with the scent of earth and rain. "You are at war with a man who knows the shadows well," Nana said, his eyes steady. "He will use the law, the whispers, and even your doubts against you." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then tell me how to fight him." Nana's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Sometimes, truth is not enough. You must gather allies. You must show the people who you are and who he is." Richard frowned. "And how do I do that?" The elder leaned forward. "By bringing the past into the light." Meanwhile, Amina and Sarah sat in the quiet of their home. Sarah's hands twisted nervously in her lap. "Mama, tell me everything. No more half-truths, no more silence." Amina's voice shook, but she obeyed. She spoke of Daniel's kindness at first, of how he had brought food and medicine when no one else would. She spoke of his jealousy, his control, his disdain for a child that wasn't his. She said of the night he left, without warning, without a word, vanishing into the city and leaving her to raise Sarah alone. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "All these years, you carried this alone." Amina reached for her daughter's hand. "I wanted to protect you from his shadow. I wanted you to grow up believing you were loved, not resented." Sarah's lip trembled. "I was loved by you, but I should have known the truth." Their hands clasped tightly, mother and daughter bound by a fragile healing. That evening, Richard returned with news. Daniel has power in Accra. He has money and friends in high places, but he also has enemies. Men who remember his debts, women who remember his betrayals. If we can find them, we can fight him. Grace nodded, her eyes gleaming. "Then that's what we'll do." But Sarah spoke quietly, her voice steady despite her tears. "What if he wins? What if the law says Mama still belongs to him?" Richard looked at her, his expression fierce and unyielding. "Then I'll break the law before I let him take her." The room went silent at his words, their weight sinking deep. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and carrying the scent of an approaching storm. The villagers whispered what was coming, old ghosts stirring, and new battles rising. Some pitied Amina, some judged her. Others simply watched, waiting to see which man would stand victorious. But within the Hale household, one truth burned brighter than fear. They were no longer just fighting for love. They were fighting for freedom. And freedom, once tasted, was something no shadow of the past could ever fully extinguish. The morning broke with a restless energy that spread through the village like fire across dry grass. The news of Daniel's letter had already made its way to every household in Adwamoa, each person whispering theories about who truly had the right to Amina and her daughter. Vendors at the market traded not only goods but also rumors. Some claimed Daniel had returned wealthy and powerful, others that Richard was an arrogant foreigner trying to steal what never belonged to him. Sarah heard every whisper. She felt every stare. Walking through the village had become a gauntlet of judgment, each pair of eyes questioning her identity. Was she Daniel's child, the man with blood ties and law on his side, or Richard's, the man who claimed her with love and conviction? She returned home with her arms full of groceries, her chest tight from the weight of uncertainty. Inside, she found her mother seated at the table, Richard pacing like a storm about to break, and Grace typing furiously on her laptop. "We can't wait any longer," Richard said, his voice clipped. "Daniel has already moved his pieces into place. He's talking to lawyers, making calls, spreading lies." Grace looked up. "I've been digging into his history. There are records, lawsuits, unpaid debts, even allegations of fraud. If we can gather witnesses, we can undermine his credibility." Amina's face was weary. "And what then? Even if he is discredited, the law still ties me to him." Richard slammed his fist onto the table. "Then we change the law." Sarah startled at the sound, the groceries nearly slipping from her arms. "Enough," she burst out, her voice trembling but strong. "Stop talking about me like I'm some prize to be fought over." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Sarah set the groceries down with shaking hands. "For days, I've listened to both of you, Mama with your secrets, Richard with your promises, but none of you asked what I want." Amina's lips parted in protest, but Sarah cut her off. "No, Mama, you kept Daniel's name in our lives all these years. You let me grow up not knowing who I was. And you," she turned to Richard, "you swooped in and claimed me as your daughter without giving me the choice to decide how I feel about it." Richard's face softened. "Sarah, no, listen to me." Sarah insisted. "I've had enough of being the shadow of your past mistakes. If Daniel wants to drag us into the courts, then I'll be the one to stand there. I'll tell them who I am." Grace leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Sarah's chest heaved with emotion. "I'll testify. I'll tell them how he abandoned us, how Mama raised me alone, how every sacrifice she made proves he has no right to call himself my father. I'll tell them that blood isn't what makes family, love is." Tears welled in Amina's eyes. "Sarah, it's too dangerous. Daniel will twist your words." "Then I'll speak louder," Sarah shot back. Richard moved closer, his eyes steady on her. "Are you sure you're ready for this? It won't be easy, he'll try to break you." Sarah straightened, her spine rigid with newfound determination. "He can try, but I've lived 21 years in his shadow without even knowing it. If this is the fight we're in, I refuse to hide anymore."
The conviction in her voice silenced the room. For the first time since Daniel's return, they saw a fighter forged from years of silence and sacrifice, not the uncertain young woman caught between two worlds. That night, Sarah sat outside beneath the stars, and the village was quiet around her. She thought of her childhood, her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair. The nights they had gone without food so Amina could pay her school fees. The way Amina's smile had never faltered even in the face of hardship. She thought of Richard, too, his fierce protectiveness, the way his presence had shaken and comforted her. She then realized that she carried both within her mother's endurance and her father's fire. And together, those pieces made her whole. The following morning, Richard arranged for a meeting with an attorney in Accra. They traveled in tense silence, the road winding through green hills and bustling towns until the city skyline rose. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Efua Mensima, greeted them in a sleek office lined with shelves of legal books. "Daniel has filed preliminary paperwork," she explained. "He's demanding recognition as Amina's lawful husband and Sarah's legal father. If successful, he could gain control over medical decisions, financial arrangements, and even Sarah's employment." Richard's fists tightened over my dead body. Efua nodded calmly. "Passion is good, but the law requires evidence. Tell me everything." Over hours, they recounted the history: Amina's accident, Daniel's disappearance, the years of silence. Efua took notes, her pen scratching furiously across the page. When Sarah spoke of her mother's sacrifices, her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. When the meeting ended, Efua leaned back. "You have a strong case. Abandonment, neglect, and his financial crimes can all be used against him." But Sarah turned her gaze on the young woman, "And it would come down to you. Your testimony could be the turning point." Sarah swallowed hard but nodded. "Then I'll do it." On the drive back, Richard reached across the seat, placing his hand over hers. "I'm proud of you." Sarah's throat tightened, but she managed a small smile. For the first time, she felt not like a girl caught between two parents, but like the bridge between them, their proof that love, no matter how fractured, could still build something unbreakable. Back in Adwamoa, Daniel was not idle. He met with local officials, shaking hands, sliding envelopes beneath the table. He whispered into ears that were eager to listen, spreading his version of the story, that Amina was his wife, stolen by a foreigner, manipulated into betraying her culture. Villagers began to choose sides. Some rallied behind Amina, their loyalty to her unshaken. Others muttered about outsiders interfering in their affairs. The division grew sharper each day, with it, the tension in the air. One evening, Sarah walked to the market alone, determined to hold her head high, but whispers followed her like shadows. "That's Daniel's girl," some said. "No, she belongs to the Americans," others argued. Finally, she stopped, turning to face the crowd that had gathered with curious eyes. "My name is Sarah Mensah Hale," she declared, her voice ringing through the market. "I am not Daniel's daughter. I am not a prize to be claimed. I am my mother's child. I am my father's child, and I will not let anyone tell me otherwise." A hush fell. The villagers stared, surprised by the strength in her voice. And slowly, a few nodded, murmurs of support rising like a tide. When she returned home, Amina embraced her tightly. "I've never been so proud of you." Sarah clung to her mother, whispering fiercely, "This ends with us, Mama. No more shadows, no more silence." And as Richard watched them, his chest swelled with pride and fear. Pride for the woman his daughter had become. Fear for the battle still ahead, where Daniel would not hesitate to use every weapon. For now, though, in that fragile moment, the family felt united. A flame had been lit in Sarah, a flame strong enough to stand against the storm. And Richard knew that sometimes the fiercest warriors were not forged in boardrooms or battles, but in the quiet resilience of daughters who refused to be silenced. The courthouse in Accra loomed like a fortress of stone and glass, its steps crowded with onlookers and reporters eager to catch the unfolding drama.
The case had become more than a family dispute. It had transformed into a spectacle, a clash between tradition and progress, between blood and chosen love. Villagers had traveled for hours to witness it, their whispers filling the air like the rustling of restless leaves. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes named Justice Owusu, presided with the calm authority of one who had seen the most desperate and absurd human conflicts. On one side sat Daniel, dressed in an immaculate suit that did little to hide the shadows etched into his face. His lawyers surrounded him like armored knights, confident and cold. On the other side, Richard stood tall beside Amina and Sarah. Grace sat behind them, a stack of documents and evidence in her hands, while Efua Mensima, their attorney, prepared her notes with meticulous care. The air was heavy with tension, a storm waiting to break. Justice Owusu called the court to order, her gavel striking wood with a sharp crack. "Counsel, present your case." Daniel's lead lawyer rose first, his voice smooth as silk. "My client, Daniel Kumi, is the lawful husband of Amina Kumi and the biological father of Sarah Kumi. For over 2 decades, he has been deprived of his rightful place in their lives, manipulated by outside forces, and left voiceless. Today, he seeks nothing more than restoring his family, recognizing his rights under Ghanaian law, and correcting a grave injustice." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Daniel sat back, his lips curling into a faint smile, as though victory were already his. Efua rose calmly, her voice clear and commanding. "Your Honor, you have just heard a story spun from half-truths and omissions. The reality is starkly different. Daniel Kumi abandoned his wife and child when they needed him most. He left Amina to raise Sarah without support, love, or acknowledgement. He cannot return after 22 years of silence and expect to claim what he discarded." She gestured toward Richard. "Furthermore, Sarah has already found a father, a man who has stood by her, supported her, and chosen her without hesitation. Family is not only blood. It is responsibility, commitment, and sacrifice. Daniel has none of these to his name." The judge's eyes flicked to Sarah. "Young woman, do you wish to testify?" Sarah's heart pounded as she rose, her knees trembling but her resolve steady. She walked to the witness stand, the eyes of the world burning into her. Sworn in, she clasped her hands together and spoke. "I grew up without a father. My mother told me stories but never told me why he wasn't there. I thought maybe he had died. Perhaps he was far away. But I learned recently that he chose to leave." Her voice wavered but grew stronger. "My mother worked 3 jobs to raise me. She skipped meals so I could eat. She hid her pain so I could smile. She is the strongest woman I know. And Daniel," she turned her gaze on him, "you are not my father. You may have given me life, but you gave me nothing else." Sarah continued, tears glistening in her eyes. "My father is Richard Hale. He may not share my blood, but he shares my heart. He has chosen me, protected me, and believed in me. And that is what being a father truly means." Amina reached for her hand when she stepped down, their fingers interlacing in silent solidarity. Daniel's lawyer objected, demanding a DNA test. But Efua was ready. She produced documents showing financial records of Daniel's fraud, witness statements from women he had deceived, and letters he had written in which he admitted to debts and failures. The weight of evidence pressed heavily against him. Daniel himself was called to the stand. At first, his answers were polished, his charm intact. But under Efua's relentless questioning, cracks began to show. She asked why he had not sent money if he genuinely cared, why he had vanished without contact for decades, and why he had waited until Sarah was grown and successful to reappear suddenly. His temper flared. "I had my reasons," he snapped. "Life is complicated." "Complicated is not abandonment," Efua countered. "Difficult is not betrayal. Complicated is not 22 years of silence while your wife struggled to raise your child alone." Daniel's voice rose. "She didn't need me. She was strong enough without me. And yet you claim her now," Efua said coldly, "only because she succeeded without you." The courtroom went silent. Even Daniel's own lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Justice Owusu leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "I have heard enough." The silence stretched, the air heavy with anticipation. This court recognizes that while the marriage between Daniel and Amina was never formally dissolved, abandonment, neglect, and fraud constitute grounds for annulment. Effective immediately, Daniel Kumi forfeits all claims as husband and father. The words struck like a thunderclap. Amina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah burst into tears of relief, clutching Richard's arm. Grace exhaled shakily, a smile breaking across her face. But Daniel surged to his feet, his voice venomous. "You can't take them from me. They're mine." The gavel struck again, sharp and final. "Sit down, Mr. Kumi," the judge commanded. "This case is closed." Security approached as Daniel struggled, his mask of charm entirely shattered. For a moment, he locked eyes with Richard, hatred burning deep. "This isn't over," he hissed, before being led away. The family gathered outside the courthouse, the sun blazing down on them. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Richard wrapped his arm around Amina's shoulders, pulling Sarah close. "We faced the truth today," Richard said softly. His voice meant only for them. "And we survived it." Amina's eyes glistened. "We more than survived. We won our freedom." Sarah looked between them, her heart swelling with love and certainty. For the first time, she felt whole, not torn between past and present, but complete in the family they had forged through fire. Richard leaned down as the crowd buzzed and the reporters shouted questions, his voice steady and sure. "This is only the beginning. From now on, we will build a life together, free of shadows." And in that moment, beneath the relentless sun of Accra, they felt the weight of the past finally lift, leaving only the promise of a future forged in truth. The court victory had given the family a taste of freedom, but freedom was never without its price. While Richard, Amina, and Sarah celebrated their triumph quietly in the guest house, Daniel sat alone in a dimly lit bar on the edge of Accra, nursing a drink that burned like fire down his throat. His pride was shattered, his reputation crumbling, his last chance at redemption stolen in a single day. He slammed the glass onto the counter, startling the bartender. "They humiliated me," he muttered, his voice rough with rage. "They turned my own daughter against me." A man sitting 2 stools away turned his head. He was sharp-suited, his expression calculated, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Trouble with family, Mr. Kumi." Daniel eyed him warily. "Who wants to know?" The man extended a hand, his smile thin. "Kwesi Boateng, let's just say I have a particular talent for turning misfortune into opportunity. And from where I sit, you've just been handed an enormous misfortune." Daniel hesitated before shaking his hand. "I lost everything today, my wife, my daughter, my future." Kwesi's eyes gleamed. "Or perhaps you've gained something else. Anger, motivation. With the right strategy, anger can be sharper than any blade." "What do you want from me?" Daniel demanded. Kwesi leaned closer. "Let's just say Richard Hale has been making enemies in more places than you know. Business rivals, political figures, people who wouldn't mind seeing him fall. Align yourself with them, and you won't just get revenge, you'll get power." Daniel's pulse quickened. He had entered the courtroom as a man clinging to a past love. He walked out stripped of everything, humiliated. But perhaps with Kwesi's help he could build something darker. Back at the guest house, the family shared a quiet dinner. For the first time in weeks, laughter filled the room. Sarah recounted the faces of the villagers when she had declared herself in the marketplace. Amina smiled, her eyes brighter than they had been in years. Richard listened, content, his hand resting gently on Amina's. But beneath the joy lingered unease. Grace noticed it first. She had been watching the street from the window, her instincts sharpened by years of dealing with adversaries. She saw the same car drive past twice, slowing near the house. "We're being watched," she whispered to Richard when the others had gone to bed. He stiffened. "Daniel." Grace nodded grimly. "I'll increase security. But, Richard, you need to understand. Men like him don't accept defeat. He'll come back harder." Richard looked toward the room where Amina and Sarah were sleeping. Let him try. This time, he won't find us unprepared. The next morning, Richard received an anonymous message on his phone. You took what's mine, I'll take what's yours. He showed it to Grace, who immediately contacted Ifua. The attorney advised them to report it to the police, but Richard knew better. Corruption ran deep, and Daniel had already proven his ability to buy loyalty. Instead, Richard called in favors of his own. Within days, 2 discreet bodyguards were stationed near the guest house, blending in with the village but always watching. Still, the tension grew heavier, the air thick with the knowledge that the battle was far from over. Sarah tried to focus on her studies and prepare applications for graduate programs, but her concentration faltered. She had fought for her identity, stood in court, and declared the truth, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that shadows still followed her. Mama asked one evening, "Do you ever regret not telling him about me all those years ago?" Amina sighed deeply. "I regret the pain it caused you. I regret the loneliness, but I don't regret keeping you safe from him. He was never the man I thought he was." Sarah nodded slowly, but her thoughts remained restless. What if he comes back? What if he tries to hurt us? Richard, overhearing from the doorway, stepped into the room. Then he'll have to go through me first. Days passed. The family began planning to return to New York, believing it was safer to leave Ghana until Daniel's fury cooled. But Daniel was already several steps ahead. With Kwesi's help, he had gathered men willing to do his bidding for a price. Men who thrived on chaos, who whispered promises of power in his ear. They struck on a humid night when the air was heavy with the scent of rain. Amina woke to footsteps outside, muffled voices too close to be casual passers-by. Her heart pounded as she wheeled herself toward the window. "Richard," she called softly, her voice tight. He was already awake, reaching for the small pistol he had brought from New York. Grace appeared in the hallway, motioning for silence. She had seen shadows moving in the yard. Then came the knock, slow, deliberate, mocking. "Open up," a voice demanded. Richard positioned himself near the door, weapon hidden at his side. "Who is it?" Silence. Then the sound of the doorknob rattling violently. The bodyguard stationed outside shouted, the crack of struggle erupting in the night. Richard opened the door to find 2 masked men grappling with the guards. Without hesitation, he stepped into the fray, fists flying, fury driving him. Grace joined in. Her strikes were precise and efficient. Inside, Sarah clutched her mother's hands, fear coursing through her. "Stay here, Mama," she whispered, before darting toward the kitchen to grab anything she could use as a weapon. The fight was brutal but short. The attackers fled into the darkness, leaving one of their own behind, groaning on the ground. The bodyguards restrained him until the police arrived hours later, summoned reluctantly by Grace's insistence. When the mask was pulled off, the man spat defiantly. "You think you won, you've just begun." The message was clear. Daniel's revenge was only beginning. The next morning, as sunlight spilled across the battered yard, Richard stood beside Amina and Sarah. "We can't stay here anymore," he said quietly. "Not if it means putting you both at risk." Amina's eyes were shadowed with worry, but she nodded. "Then where?" Richard looked out at the horizon, his jaw set. "Back to New York, to safety, to build a life without his shadow hanging over us." But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. Oceans would not bind Daniel's reach. The man was desperate, humiliated, and filled with venom, and desperate men were the most dangerous of all. As the family packed their belongings that night, Sarah paused at the window gazing at the darkened village she had once called home. She felt both sorrow and strength, a strange blend that settled in her chest. "Mama," she whispered as Amina wheeled in beside her, "whatever happens, we face it together." Amina squeezed her daughter's hand, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Together, always." Far away, in a smoky backroom lit by a single bulb, Daniel sat across from Kwesi, maps and documents spread before them. They spoke in low voices, their words sharp with conspiracy. "Daniel said they've escaped," his mouth twisting into a grim smile, "but they haven't seen what I'm truly capable of." Kwesi's smile was cold. "Then show them." And in that moment, the shadows of revenge stretched across the ocean.
reaching toward a family who thought the worst was behind them but had yet to face the darkest storm. The transatlantic flight from Accra to New York was silent for much of the journey. Amina sat by the window, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the glass as clouds drifted beneath them. Sarah leaned against her shoulder, exhausted but alert, her eyes darting toward every movement of the flight attendants. Richard sat beside them, his jaw tight, his thoughts heavy with strategy. He had lived a life of calculated decisions, but nothing had prepared him for the chaos Daniel had unleashed. When the plane landed at JFK, the relief was short-lived. As they moved through the arrivals hall, Richard's instincts flared. He noticed a man in a leather jacket watching them too closely, his gaze lingering on Amina's wheelchair, on Sarah's anxious movements. Richard slowed, testing. The man followed.
"We're not safe here either," Richard muttered under his breath. Grace, who had flown separately and joined them at the terminal, immediately caught on. She adjusted her bag, her expression calm but her eyes scanning like a hawk. "Keep walking," she whispered. "Don't stop." They made it to the waiting car arranged by Richard's contacts, but the sense of being hunted lingered. Even as the Manhattan skyline rose before them, glittering in the twilight, it felt less like homecoming and more like stepping into the lion's den. At the penthouse, Richard activated security protocols he had installed years ago but never thought he would need. Steel shutters reinforced the windows, cameras scanned every corner, and a private guard team rotated shifts outside. Yet the most significant threat wasn't outside. It was the knowledge that Daniel was still out there, gathering strength in the shadows. Sarah sat on the sofa's edge, staring at the engagement ring her father had once intended for Amina. It sparkled softly under the light, symbolizing promises nearly broken by time and circumstance. "We can't live like this forever," she whispered, always waiting for him to strike. "We won't," Richard assured her. "This ends soon, one way or another." The next blow came faster than expected. Within days, Richard's company faced a sudden investigation from regulatory authorities. Anonymous tips accused him of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Headlines screamed scandal, investors panicked, and board members whispered betrayal. "It's him," Grace confirmed, after hours of digging. "Daniel and Kwesi are behind this. They've fed lies to the press, bribed officials, twisted every crack they could find in the system." Richard clenched his fists. "They want to destroy me from the inside." But what they hadn't counted on was unity. Amina insisted on attending every meeting, and her presence was a quiet but powerful reminder of resilience. Using her sharp mind and training, Sarah analyzed financial data to dismantle false claims. Grace orchestrated allies in the press, countering lies with truth. Still, the storm raged. And then came the night when the storm turned violent. It was raining hard, and the city streets were swathed in neon reflections. Sarah had stepped outside to clear her mind, her umbrella barely shielding her from the downpour. She didn't notice the black van until it stopped beside her. Hands grabbed her before she could scream. The umbrella fell, clattering uselessly onto the pavement. Within seconds, she was dragged inside, a cloth pressed to her mouth, darkness closing in. The phone was already ringing when Richard realized she was missing. He answered with shaking hands. "We have your daughter," Daniel's voice hissed. "If you ever want to see her alive again, you'll meet me alone. Midnight, Pier 47. Bring nothing but yourself." Richard's blood turned to ice. "If you touch her," the line went dead. Amina wheeled forward, her face pale but her voice steady. "You can't go alone. That's what he wants." Richard looked at her, torn between rage and fear. He knew Daniel well enough to understand the danger, but knew there was no other choice. Grace stepped in. "You won't go alone. Not really. We'll be there in the shadows. He won't see us coming." Midnight came heavy with fog. Pier 47 stretched out into the black water, deserted except for a few rusting cargo containers. Richard walked alone down the slick wooden planks, the mist curling around him like a shroud. Daniel emerged from the darkness, his face gaunt but his eyes burning with madness.
Behind him stood Quasi and two armed men, and bound to a chair at the edge of the pier was Sarah, gagged, her eyes wide with terror. "You took everything from me, Daniel Spa, my wife, child, and legacy. Tonight, I take it back." "You never lost them," Richard shot back. "You threw them away. And now you're trying to steal what you don't deserve."
Daniel's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Who deserves anything in this world? It's about power, and tonight, I prove who has it." He motioned to his men. One pressed a gun to Sarah's temple. Richard's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Let her go, Daniel. This is between you and me." "You don't give me orders," Daniel snarled. "You think money and love make you strong, but in the end, fear is stronger. And I'll make her fear me." A faint click echoed through the fog. One of Daniel's men stiffened, then dropped silently, a tranquilizer dart in his neck. Another fell moments later, clutching his leg where Grace's shot had struck true. Chaos erupted. Quasi shouted, pulling a gun, but Richard lunged, tackling him to the ground. The weapon skittered across the pier. Daniel roared, rushing toward Sarah, but Amina's voice rang out from the shadows. "Don't you touch her." She wheeled forward from behind a container, a pistol steady in her trembling hands. For a moment, the pier froze in silence. Daniel staring at the woman he had once abandoned, the woman who had raised their daughter alone. "You can't even stand," Daniel sneered. "You think you'll stop me?" Amina's eyes blazed with fury and love. "I already have." The shot rang out, shattering the night. Daniel staggered, clutching his shoulder, his face twisted with shock and rage. He stumbled backward toward the pier's edge, the water churning below. Richard freed Sarah from her bonds, pulling her into his arms. She sobbed into his chest, trembling but alive. Daniel's voice, ragged and venomous, carried through the mist. "This isn't over. You can't erase me. I'll haunt you forever." Then he fell, crashing into the black water below. The waves swallowed him, leaving only ripples and silence. The police arrived minutes later, alerted by Grace's earlier call. Quasi was taken into custody, and his empire of lies crumbled with him. The two wounded men were dragged away, their loyalty bought too cheaply to withstand capture. The family stood together on the pier, drenched in rain and tears. Richard held Sarah close, his other hand gripping Amina's. "It's over," he whispered. "Finally over." Amina looked out at the dark water, her heart heavy but resolute. "No, Richard, it's just beginning. For the first time, we can truly live." As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, the family walked away from the pier. Their past was scarred, their present hard-won, but their future stretched wide before them. Sarah glanced at her parents, their hands entwined, their eyes filled with a love stronger than fear, stronger than revenge. She smiled through her tears. Together, she whispered, "Always." And for the first time in 22 years, the shadows lifted. The reckoning was done. What remained was hope. Resides and vers being sometimes the